I've lived alone for about 3 years now. My apartment isn't anything special, just a small place on the second floor of an older building tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. It's the kind of place where you recognize faces, but don't necessarily know names. You wave when you see each other, but that's the extent of it. It's usually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you forget you live in a city at all. That's why what happened one night last winter still doesn't sit right with me. It started with a knock. It was 2 a.m. I'd just gotten into bed, phone in hand, scrolling through videos to tire myself out. I heard it, 3 short knocks on my door. Not loud, but sharp enough to freeze me. Nobody knocks on your door at 2 a.m. unless it's bad news. I muted my phone and just listened. A few seconds later, another knock. This time, a little harder. I live alone. I don't really have friends who show up unannounced, and my family lives 2 states away. Immediately, my mind went to the worst possibilities. Maybe a neighbor had an emergency. Maybe something happened downstairs. But the unease in my stomach told me it was something else. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and crept toward the door. My building is old, and every step on those wooden floors seems to creak no matter how careful you are. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. Then a voice, low, muffled, a man. "Hey, you awake?" I didn't answer. He knocked again, harder this time. "I know you're in there." That's when the real fear set in. He didn't sound panicked or like someone needing help. His tone was calm. Too calm. I backed away from the door, grabbed my phone, and typed out 911, but didn't hit call yet. I wanted to be sure. For a full minute, there was nothing, just my heart pounding in my ears. I thought maybe he'd left, but then I heard it, the doorknob, a slow, deliberate twist, back and forth. Testing. That's when I hit call. I whispered into the phone, telling the operator there was someone trying to get into my apartment. She asked me for my address, my apartment number, if I was safe. I remember whispering, "He's at my door right now." The operator told me to stay quiet, stay on the line, and that officers were on their way. Meanwhile, the knob kept turning. Then came a dull thud, his shoulder hitting the door. My building isn't exactly secure. The doors are old. I knew it wouldn't take much. I tiptoed back into my bedroom and shut the door, clutching the phone like it was my lifeline. The operator's voice was calm, steady. "They're on the way. Just stay where you are." And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the lock giving way. The door burst open. I froze. I didn't even breathe. From the bedroom, I could hear his footsteps on the creaky floorboards, slow and methodical, like he was taking his time. The operator whispered, "Are you safe?" I couldn't answer. The footsteps grew louder, closer. He was moving through my living room into the small hallway that led toward the bedroom and bathroom. I could see the faint shadow moving under the crack of my door. I held the phone to my mouth and whispered, "He's inside." "Stay quiet. Officers are almost there," she said. The shadow paused outside my bedroom door. I swear I could hear him breathing. Then, slowly, the handle began to turn. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could reach, a lamp from my nightstand, and raised it, ready to swing with everything I had. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. The knob turned halfway, stopped, and then sirens. They weren't right outside, but close enough. The man must have heard them too, because the knob snapped back and I heard hurried footsteps retreating. The front door slammed. The operator said, "They're there. Stay put." Within minutes, there was pounding again, but this time from the police. "It's the police! Open up!" When I finally stepped out, there were 2 officers with flashlights scanning my apartment. The front door frame was splintered, the lock barely hanging on. They cleared each room, but of course, he was gone. They asked me if I saw him, if I knew him. I told them no, just the voice. I described what little I'd heard. Male, calm, low voice. They nodded, but I could tell by their faces that they'd heard this story before. The officers stayed with me while a locksmith came to temporarily fix the lock. One of them told me, most likely he was looking for an easy target, someone who just opened the door. But the way he moved through my apartment, it didn't feel random. It felt like he knew exactly what he was doing. For weeks after, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant knock in the building made my chest tighten. I bought a new deadbolt, a security bar, even a camera. But nothing really makes you feel safe again after someone's been inside your home like that. The scariest part? He never took anything. Not a single thing. He just walked through my space, lingered at my bedroom door, and left. I don't usually tell this story because even though it happened years ago, it still makes my heart race just thinking about it. Every time I do, I feel myself right back there, alone, in that apartment, listening to sounds I'll never forget. At the time, I was 21, just out of college, and living by myself for the very first time. I'd moved into this old apartment complex on the east side of town, the kind of place that felt affordable but temporary. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. The walls were thin, the paint chipped in spots, and the stairwell always smelled faintly like cigarettes and damp carpet. Still, it was mine. For the first few months, I felt proud of myself, just unlocking the door and stepping into a place that was entirely mine. A little one-bedroom unit with creaky floors, a drafty window in the bedroom, and a front door that stuck unless you gave it a good shove with your shoulder. My building had maybe 12 units total. Most of my neighbors kept to themselves. There was an older woman across the hall who was friendly enough, a young couple downstairs who argued loudly, but always smiled when they saw me, and a few others I barely recognized. It wasn't the kind of place where people looked out for each other. It was the kind of place where everyone just minded their own business. At first, I didn't mind. I liked the independence. I worked late shifts at a diner nearby, usually not getting home until close to midnight. I'd come in, heat up leftovers, put on some music, and try to wind down. But a few weeks before the night I'll never forget, little things started happening that put me on edge. One night, coming home from work, I thought I saw someone standing under the flickering streetlight near the dumpster. Just a dark figure, tall, wearing a hood. When I glanced again, they were gone. Another time, I thought I heard footsteps behind me in the stairwell, but when I turned, no one was there. I told myself it was just my imagination. I was tired, overworked, and maybe still adjusting to being alone in a not-so-great neighborhood. But deep down, I knew something felt off. Then came that night. It was a Wednesday in late fall. The air had turned cold, the kind of night where your breath hangs in the air and the streets are eerily quiet. I remember walking home from my shift, cutting across the empty parking lot behind the complex. My shoes crunched on gravel, and all I could hear was the distant hum of a highway. Halfway across the lot, I heard something else. Footsteps. They were faint at first, then quicker, crunching against the same gravel I was walking on. I froze, my pulse instantly spiking. When I turned around, the lot looked empty. Just rows of parked cars and a dim security light buzzing overhead. I forced myself to keep walking, faster now. The footsteps seemed to follow, always a second behind mine. I reached the stairwell door and yanked it open, the metal handle cold in my hand. I darted inside and slammed it behind me. The stairwell was silent. My heart thudded in my chest as I climbed to the second floor, listening, waiting. But the only sound was the creak of my own steps. When I finally reached my apartment and locked the door behind me, I laughed nervously at myself. "Get a grip," I muttered, tossing my bag onto the couch. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been alone out there. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I microwaved some leftover fries, scrolled my phone, and tried to relax. By the time I crawled into bed, it was almost 2 a.m. I pulled the covers tight, left a small lamp on, and eventually drifted off. I don't know how long I slept before the sound woke me. At first, it was faint, a soft, metallic rattle, like something brushing against metal. My groggy brain tried to place it. Then I realized it was coming from the front door. My eyes shot open. I held my breath and listened. The sound came again. The unmistakable, careful jiggle of someone testing the lock. I froze in bed, every nerve screaming. Maybe it was the neighbors, I thought. Maybe someone drunk at the wrong door. But then it came again, more deliberate, slower. Someone was trying to open my door. I slid out of bed, moving as quietly as I could. My apartment was small, and the front door was only a few steps from the bedroom. I crept into the living room, heart hammering, and stared at the door. The doorknob turned. Not a full twist, just a subtle, testing turn. Back and forth. Back and forth. I wanted to scream, to yell that I was calling the cops, but terror glued my throat shut. Instead, I backed away slowly and reached for my phone. My hand shook so badly, I almost dropped it. I dialed 911, whispering into the receiver. "Someone's trying to get into my apartment." The operator's calm voice told me to stay quiet, stay on the line, and that officers were on their way. As I whispered back, I heard another sound. A soft scrape, lower this time. They were trying the lock with something. Maybe a tool, maybe a card. I stood frozen, staring at the thin wooden door separating me from whoever was out there. My peephole was covered by a cheap little flap, but something in me needed to look. Slowly, carefully, I lifted the flap and nearly dropped dead on the spot. An eye stared back at me, right up against the peephole, wide, unblinking, bloodshot. I gasped and stumbled backward, the phone almost slipping from my hand. The person outside chuckled softly, a low, horrible laugh that seeped right through the door. The operator's voice in my ear sounded far away. "Stay calm. Officers are minutes away. Don't engage." I backed into the bedroom, locked the flimsy door, and shoved a chair under the handle. I crouched in the corner, phone pressed to my ear, every muscle trembling. For what felt like forever, I listened to the noises outside. More scraping, another rattling twist of the knob. Then silence. Minutes crawled by. Then, faintly, the sound of voices outside. Police. I ran to the living room and peeked out the window just as red and blue lights splashed across the parking lot. By the time I opened the door for them, whoever had been there was gone. The officers searched the stairwell and the lot, but found no one. What they did find were fresh scratches around my doorknob and a half-smoked cigarette butt on the ground right outside my unit. They told me I wasn't the only one. Other tenants had reported someone lurking around at night, trying doors, maybe even casing apartments. That night, I didn't sleep. I barely slept for weeks after. Every creak of the building, every footstep in the hall made my heart lurch. I eventually broke my lease and moved out months earlier than planned. To this day, I don't know who was on the other side of that door. I don't know what they wanted or what would have happened if my lock hadn't held. But I do know this. Every time I walk into a new place, the first thing I check is the door, the lock, the peephole. Because I'll never forget the night I looked through mine, and someone was already looking back. I live alone in a small, two-bedroom house on the edge of town. It's not a bad area, but it's the kind of neighborhood where people leave porch lights on at night, and everyone knows that break-ins happen from time to time. I had lived there for about a year, and aside from the occasional car alarm or stray dog rummaging through trash cans, nothing unusual ever happened. That changed one night in late October. It was a Thursday evening, and I had stayed up later than usual watching TV. I remember glancing at the clock and seeing it was almost 1 a.m. I turned off the lights, checked that the back door was locked, and went to bed. About 20 minutes later, just as I was drifting off, I heard something. At first, it sounded like a faint knock, then a scratching noise, like someone dragging their nails across wood. My bedroom is toward the back of the house, so I sat up and listened. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a branch. It was deliberate. Then came a metallic rattle. The unmistakable sound of a doorknob being tested. I froze. I wasn't sure if it was coming from the front door or the back, but I knew someone was trying to get inside. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I dialed 911, but didn't press call right away. I was trying to convince myself maybe it was a neighbor, maybe a drunk person who got the wrong house. Then I heard it again, this time louder. The front doorknob twisted hard enough that the bolt rattled in its socket. I pressed call. The dispatcher answered, calm and steady, asking what my emergency was. I whispered that someone was trying to get into my house. She told me to stay on the line, stay quiet, and that officers were on their way. I crept out of bed and into the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I felt sick. I could see the faint glow from the porch light bleeding in around the edges of the front door. As I stood there, holding my breath, a shadow moved across the glass window next to the door. Whoever it was, they were standing just feet away. I whispered this to the dispatcher. She told me not to confront them, to stay hidden, and to let the police handle it. And then, the sound that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it, a heavy thud against the door. They were throwing their shoulder into it, testing the frame. I backed up slowly, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from making noise. I made it to my bedroom and locked the door, though I knew that flimsy lock wouldn't do much if someone got inside. I crawled into the corner, still whispering to the dispatcher, begging her to tell me where the police were. "They're close," she said. "Just a few more minutes." But those minutes stretched into what felt like forever. The intruder circled the house. I heard the crunch of footsteps in the gravel by my bedroom window. Then the tapping started. Slow, methodical taps against the glass. I thought they were going to break it. I actually pictured the glass exploding inward and someone climbing through. I whispered to the dispatcher that I couldn't breathe, that I felt like I was going to pass out. She kept talking, kept reassuring me that help was almost there. Then, just when I thought it was about to happen, that the window would shatter, I heard something else. A distant siren. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps moved quickly now, fading into the distance. Whoever it was had bolted. Within 2 minutes, red and blue lights flooded my street. I could hear radios crackling and doors slamming. An officer shouted my name, telling me it was safe to come out. When I opened the front door, there were 3 officers standing there. They checked the perimeter, found fresh shoe prints in the dirt by the windows, and marks on the front door where someone had clearly tried to force it open. They told me I wasn't the first person in the area to call in something like this recently. A couple of homes had been broken into the same way, late at night, with the intruder testing doors and windows until they found an easy way in. That night, they didn't catch him. I barely slept at all after the police left. I sat on the couch with every light in the house on, waiting for morning. For weeks afterward, I jumped at every noise. I bought extra locks, cameras, motion lights, anything that might make me feel safer. But the truth is, once you hear someone trying to force their way into your home while you're inside, you never really sleep the same again. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. The police think he was looking for houses that seemed easy to break into, maybe looking to rob someone. But the way he moved around my house that night, tapping on the glass, circling back and forth, it felt like more than that. The hardest part is knowing he was only a thin pane of glass or a deadbolt away from being inside with me. And if the sirens hadn't come when they did, I don't know how this story would have ended.